What's up, cool people? My name's Matt, aka That Random Christian Gamer. Welcome to tonight's live stream. Sorry, got distracted by a phone notification. I don't think it's anything important, though. Anyway, okay, it's a Thursday, which means we're kicking it off with some Bible study, continuing our read through the book of Job. Really, also, that is part of reading through the whole Bible. But yeah, we'll be looking at Job chapters 21 and 22, which chapter 21 kind of wraps up Job's response to the last thing Zophar, his third friend, said, thus ending the second round of discussion between Job and all his friends. And then after that, we start round 3 of that conversation. But let me not get too much ahead of myself on that. After the Bible study, though, we will be continuing the final campaign story job thing in PowerWash Simulator. We got about a quarter of it done last time. Here's hoping we get at least about another quarter of it done. I realize towards the end, though, it's going to slow down a bit, probably. But anyway, yeah, other than that, not a whole lot going on. Don't really have anything else planned for the evening, as far as the stream is considered anyway. Yeah, so not a whole lot else to say before we get rolling. If there are no objections, I will go ahead and run the early set of ads on Twitch, and then we can hop into Bible study. So I suppose, Twitch folks, I will see you on the flip side of that ad break thing. And then YouTube folks are just still here. Like, there ain't ads, at least while this is live, on the YouTube end of things. And I don't think there would be ads on this until the channel, or I should say unless the channel was monetized. But certainly as of the point where this is live, it is not. Anywho, I digress. Train of thought. Just going wherever it feels like. Anyway. Okay. Let me get a sip of water here. So, the weather has definitely warmed up a bit in the recent weeks, to the point where, you know, I'm waking up and, like, as I go to work, even as early as I do, I'm still going out there in just shorts and a t-shirt. Because my work allows that. Because my work area, really the work area of most of the people where I work, is not air conditioned. So yeah. Yeah. I'm glad the dress code is kind of loose where I work. Because otherwise, I couldn't imagine being, like, wearing lots of clothes in even this kind of weather, never mind when it actually gets, like, really hot. But okay. It is time to begin the Bible study. So, we are at Job chapter 21 now. And Zophar spoke in the last chapter for the second time. And he really just seemed to kind of hammer in the idea that, you know, God eventually punishes wicked people. That's really the general gist of what was said. And that's really most of what's been said by Job's friends throughout this conversation. All, like, how many chapters has it been by this point? Like, 16 or so? Because I think chapter 1 and 2 were just kind of setting up Job's situation. Chapter 3 was Job's initial, like, outcry. And then chapter 4 got into the back and forth. But yeah. For those who are joining in at this point of the book of Job, his life was going really well. He was also a very righteous man. God pointed that out to a dude called Satan, to which Satan's like, yeah, take his stuff away and, like, make some bad stuff happen to him. Or let me make some bad stuff happen to him. And then we'll see what he thinks of you, God. So, yeah. Nearly everything he had was taken away, and he's been dealing with all sorts of other stuff, too. Boils, terrifying visions, I believe, is how the one aspect of it was described. And then since that point, also, like, mockery from the people around him. And assumptions that he did something wrong. But anyway. So yeah, Job's friends saying all this stuff about wicked people, there's been an implication that it applies to Job each and every time. Because they feel like they need to set him straight, and he's not seeing his own sin. Whereas he is like, no, I'm innocent. They think he's just not being honest. He knows that he did nothing wrong. At least nothing in particular to trigger all this stuff happening to him. But anyway, okay. There's some context for this chapter. So, here we go. Job chapter 21. Then Job spoke again. Listen closely to what I am saying. That's one consolation you can give me. Bear with me and let me speak. After I have spoken, you may resume mocking me. My complaint is with God, not with people. I have good reason to be so impatient. Look at me and be stunned. Put your hand over your mouth in shock. When I think about what I am saying, I shudder. My body trembles. Pausing there because the next section's a bit longer. So, he says his complaint is with God, and, I mean, I guess, at least in a way, he thinks that it is. It wasn't really outright stated that God was the one who did all this stuff to Job. I think it was more that God allowed Satan to do this stuff to Job. But in any case, not like Job knows that in particular. So, either, you know, he is now trying to, you know, move around the fact that the insults that have gone back and forth between him and his friends aren't going anywhere, and so he's like just kind of saying, okay, look, my problem isn't with you, all three of you that are arguing with me right now. My main problem here is with God, because of all this stuff just happening for no apparent reason. Whether or not that'll actually, you know, make his friends any more agreeable, we'll have to wait and see. But, yeah. He's probably not wanting to deal with that aspect of the conversation anymore. Because in each of the past few chapters, there's, for the most part, been either side of the argument asking if, asking something like, do you think I'm stupid? Or we're stupid? Probably not. I don't think either side actually thinks the other is stupid. It's just a thing that happens to us as people where we tend to get a bit defensive when we think we've been insulted. And or when we try to be more convincing. But anyway, so Job previously asked his friends to just stop talking. And now he's still kind of asking that, but instead wording it more like, all right, let me say what I've said. Because I think that's actually more so his concern, is making sure that he's heard and that they actually pay attention to what he's saying rather than focusing on getting them to be quiet. But even this part right here where he says, I shudder at what I'm saying, it's like, he can't believe, in a way, well, his own situation, but also, like, the things that he has had to say as a result of that. I bet you when things were going well, he never imagined he would be, questioning, various aspects of his relationship with God. But as things stand, it's not terribly surprising that he would be questioning all that. Anyway. Okay. That's just the first 6 verses. Let me move along to verse 7. Why do the wicked prosper, growing old and powerful? They live to see their children grow up and settle down, and they enjoy their grandchildren. Their homes are safe from every fear, and God does not punish them. Their bulls never fail to breed. Their cows bear calves and never miscarry. They let their children frisk about like lambs. Their little ones skip and dance. They sing with tambourine and harp. They celebrate to the sound of the flute. They spend their days in prosperity, then go down to the grave in peace. And yet they say to God, go away, we want no part of you and your ways. Who is the Almighty, and why should we obey him? What good will it do us to pray? They think their prosperity is of their own doing, but I will have nothing to do with that kind of thinking. Okay, pausing again. So, there's been a lot of statements made that seem very absolute. And at least in Job's case, I'm pretty sure they're meant more as like him saying how things seem to be. Maybe it's not necessarily the case all the time, but it certainly seems like there are plenty of cases in which wicked people prosper. Like, they have the means to protect themselves, whether that be through, well-built physical defenses and or, paying for guards or things of that sort. I mean, there's that, or there's like, also like kind of socially wealthy people, wicked or not, are able to make powerful connections very easily because of their wealth. So, now, I would disagree with the idea that God does not punish them in reality. Like, if we're looking at eternity in particular, they do eventually get punished. But I think, again, Job might be more just talking about how things feel, and also kind of making some generalizations about what happens in this life on Earth. I mean, his friends have been making generalizations the entire time. Part of the thing is, with Job, like, he is the exception to what they're saying. Or an exception. And he might recognize that there are exceptions. In fact, he's recognizing a different kind of exception to some other things that they've said. They seem to assume that, bad things only happen to wicked people, and also that wicked people are eventually punished, but Job's recognizing that no, there are at least some wicked people who don't get punished in this life. And so, like, that just kind of thwarts their idea, or if they really let it sink in and accepted it, it would kind of thwart their idea that, oh, Job must have done something wrong because God always punishes people who are wicked and only punishes people who are wicked. If the always part isn't true, then the only part could also be untrue. Note there where it talks about the grave, Hebrew says Sheol. I've mentioned it a few times as we've gone through. That's just kind of their view of sort of an afterlife. It was just, I guess you could almost think of it in like well, no, I don't want to compare it to like the Greek mythological idea of the underworld or anything like that. Just think of it as a sort of generally viewed as neutral afterlife. But, yeah. One last little thing, though. Job is acknowledging that even people who say they want nothing to do with God and, like, directly say and do things without caring about God, even people like that prosper. His friends have been harping on the idea of like, no, wicked people always get punished, at least eventually. And in fact, I think this next section is going to say that Job is going to say some things that are like directly opposite to some exact phrases that his friends said before. Perhaps more specifically Zophar, since he was the most recent one to speak. Anyway, so after talking about these people completely ignoring God, we move on to verse 17. Yet the light of the wicked never seems to be extinguished. Do they ever have trouble? Does God distribute sorrows to them in anger? Are they driven before the wind like straw? Are they carried away by the storm like chaff? Not at all. Well, you say, at least God will punish their children. But I say he should punish the ones who sin, so that they understand his judgment. Let them see their destruction with their own eyes. Let them drink deeply of the anger of the Almighty. For they will not care what happens to their family after they are dead. But who can teach a lesson to God, since he judges even the most powerful? One person dies in prosperity, completely comfortable and secure, the picture of good health, vigorous and fit. Another person dies in bitter poverty, never having tasted the good life. But both are buried in the same dust, both eaten by the same maggots. Yeah, I almost wonder, in a way, if that has been a broader point that Job's been trying to lead them to. Like, really, to God, and Job's friends have even said this, to God, none of us by our own doing are really righteous. None of us are, worthy of really anything from God. We all do even little things here and there that are not what God would want. And so, none of us can really fully be considered good enough for God's grace on our own. And so, really, I mean, to us, it might seem that there are some people who are, more righteous or more wicked than others. But to God, that's not really the case. And so then it makes a little bit more sense why some people who seem so wicked might actually, again, at least in this life, not be punished by God. Because if it was really just a matter of who does the most good prospers and who does the most evil suffers, life would be very, very different. And there would also be so many other things about the dynamic between us and God that would be such a massive shift. But point being, realistically, all of us would deserve to have lives of poverty then. If we just, approached God with our own presumed righteousness, or perceived might be the better word there. And really, when all is said and done, again, at least as it has to do with life on Earth, we all end up dying anyway. And after we die, good, bad, rich, poor, none of that makes a lick of difference. Again, as far as life on Earth is concerned. But, yeah. I could comment more on some of this stuff, but I feel like I would be kind of repeating things that I've said before. Especially 17 and 18 feel like a continuation of what was said earlier and not much more than that. And, yeah, to this I say, what if God really did punish the children of people who sinned? What good does that do? Like, in fact, I thought there was a point, I seem to recall a verse somewhere that, I mean, it does mention, like, God will, bless people who follow his commands or something like that to like 1,000 generations. But then there will be, curses upon people who disobey for a much smaller number of generations. But anyway, so like that idea could have something to do with God punishing the children. But is it really God's punishment, or is it generally more of just here's the fallout from the wickedness itself? Anyway, and obviously God being so much more powerful, knowledgeable, and otherwise divine than us, like, how are we gonna change God's mind about anything? Especially as it relates to the ways that seemingly righteous and seemingly wicked people prosper or don't. Anyway, okay. On to verse 27. Look, I know what you're thinking. I know the schemes you plot against me. You will tell me of rich and wicked people whose houses have vanished because of their sins. But ask those who have been around, and they will tell you the truth. Evil people are spared in times of calamity, and are allowed to escape disaster. No one criticizes them openly or pays them back for what they have done. When they are carried to the grave, an honor guard keeps watch at their tomb. A great funeral procession goes to the cemetery. Many pay their respects as the body is laid to rest, and the earth gives sweet repose. How can your empty cliches comfort me? All your explanations are lies. So, that kind of seems to go back to what he was saying before. Although, now also Job's adding the little bit of like, alright, look, I know you're probably gonna try and give me examples of the opposite of what I'm saying. But, I mean, there are people who fit what I'm saying. So can you really say that, it is 100% true that God punishes wicked people? Not necessarily. Not in this life, anyway. So, yeah, I mean, I would think Job is wise enough to know that what he's saying here isn't always the case. Like, there are definitely examples of wicked people who are struck down and, end up in misery. But, like, the point from his perspective, or at least his task in the argument really, is more so to disprove what his friends are saying and the absolutes with which they are speaking, rather than, I mean, yes, he's also trying to defend his own innocence, but if he can get it through to them that their framework of good people get good stuff from God and bad people get bad stuff from God, and there's like no avoiding that, if he can get that out of their heads, then maybe he can get them to see that he himself is not, in fact, a wicked man, like they seem to think he is. But maybe I'm making assumptions about Job and what he's thinking and, his kind of goal at this point of the conversation. But that's, I think, at least part of what I would be thinking were I in Job's shoes. And right at the end here, when he talks about their empty cliches, that in particular kind of emphasized that possible goal of Job's there, because they keep saying these generalized cliche in a way things about how God relates to wicked people and righteous people, and he's throwing it back at them like, no, these are not hard and fast, set in stone, 100% of the time truths. They're cliches. It's like, no, that's not how everything works all the time. Even if it is true most of the time, the fact that it's not all of the time means that there is room for there to be wicked people who prosper and are not punished, but also righteous people who, have calamity befall them. And it's not necessarily a punishment from God. Although, he might think all this stuff that has happened to him is a punishment from God still. We know it's not, because of the earlier chapters, but he might think that. His friends definitely do. But anyway, okay. I think that wraps up my thoughts on this chapter. And then we move on to the next one, and Eliphaz joins the conversation again. Okay. Just gonna make sure my Xbox doesn't freaking turn off on me. Also, Seth, 60 stream watch streak. I mean, considering, well, I guess this started back when I didn't only stream twice a week, maybe. Although, I mean, 30 weeks. Yeah, no, I guess that was still within this situation. Anyway. Point being, it's a fairly impressive streak. Alrighty, but back to the Bible study. Okay, we have made it to Job chapter 22 now. And it says right here, Eliphaz's third response, so round 3 of the argument, or whatever you want to call it, begins now. Ding, ding, ding. But before we actually get into that, context, Job was doing real well. Life was good. He was doing good things. But he had everything taken away from him as like a test. Not as punishment, as a test. Specifically because God pointed out how good he was to this dude known as Satan. And Satan's like, give him a hard time and see how he feels about you. So, yeah. But he has some, at this point, I think it's worth air quoting, friends. Some of his friends come along and, you know, initially they try to comfort him, but then he speaks out and says some things about God that they don't really like the sound of, and now they think he's just so far gone in his sin that they need to, like, try and set him straight. But he's continuously telling them, no, I am innocent. I've done nothing wrong. They keep talking on and on about, you know, how wicked people are punished. At least eventually. And Job's like, okay, but not all wicked people are punished. So, like, if you're thinking good things only happen to good people and bad things only happen to bad people, like, the existence of exceptions to that makes it so maybe I am not a bad person. I know I'm not a bad person. I did not do anything wrong to merit all of this stuff that has happened to me. But the friends, at least up until this point, have assumed that's just the sin talking, and he's trying to make excuses for himself. So, yeah. Honestly, that's probably been the context for a while in this conversation, and probably will continue to be. At least to some extent. So, Eliphaz is about to speak for the third time. Here we go. Job chapter 22. Then Eliphaz the Temanite replied, can a person do anything to help God? Can even a wise person be helpful to him? Is it any advantage to the Almighty if you are righteous? Would it be any gain to him if you were perfect? Is it because you're so pious that he accuses you and brings judgment against you? No, it's because of your wickedness. There's no limit to your sins. See, right there, Eliphaz outright says that he thinks Job is sinful, and that's why he's being judged. I mean, judgment is the word he uses here, so that's why I'm using that word in this case instead of punished. I mean, realistically, you know, going along with the first couple of verses here, it's like, okay, yeah, God doesn't really need us for anything. Even if we are generally wise, or even strong, or fast, or whatever, like, even the absolute best person in every possible respect, like, God doesn't need anyone. But, like, that doesn't necessarily mean that that doesn't necessarily mean that Job is being punished for sin here. Like, the two do not really quite line up the way Eliphaz seems to think. Now, I mean, honestly, some people kind of get themselves in trouble for how pious they are, I would argue. Like, they're so focused on their piety and not enough on, you know, actually caring about others that they don't do the things that God would have them do. But yeah, I think Eliphaz's main point there is like saying to Job, look, God's not punishing you because you're such a great person. Which is a bit ironic, because in a way, Job's situation was started because God pointed out how good he was. So, even at that, again, Eliphaz wouldn't know. Job probably wouldn't even necessarily know. But we know that, like, Eliphaz is actually kind of ironically saying the opposite of what is true. It's not necessarily judgment from God that's being brought upon Job, but Job's situation, in a way, almost is because he was so pious. Or at least, I would more so use the word righteous, maybe. So, I don't know, just finding that a little bit funny, at least the irony of that. But, let's move along. Verse 6. For example, you must have lent money to your friend and demanded clothing as security. Yes, you stripped him to the bone. You must have refused water for the thirsty and food for the hungry. You probably think the land belongs to the powerful and only the privileged have a right to it. You must have sent widows away empty-handed and crushed the hopes of orphans. That is why you are surrounded by traps and tremble from sudden fears. That is why you cannot see in the darkness, and waves of water cover you. God is so great, higher than the heavens, higher than the farthest stars. But you reply, that's why God can't see what I am doing. How can he judge through the thick darkness? For thick clouds swirl about him, and he cannot see us. He is way up there, walking on the vault of heaven. Will you continue on the old paths where evil people have walked? They were snatched away in the prime of life, the foundations of their lives washed away. For they said to God, leave us alone. What can the Almighty do to us? Yet he was the one who filled their homes with good things. So I will have nothing to do with that kind of thinking. So, okay, pausing there now. Like, Eliphaz is so convinced Job must have done something wrong that he starts listing things off that Job could possibly have done at some point that he thinks would then bring all of this stuff upon Job. Like he's trying to trigger some sort of memory within Job to get him to finally say, oh wait, I guess I did do that thing, and that's why all this bad stuff has happened to me. That's not really the case with Job, but Eliphaz is convinced that it must be. And, like, in a way, it seems as if the more that Job defends himself, and especially the more he talks about God in even a remotely negative way, or even just a way that could be perceived as negative, the more Job talks like that, the more Eliphaz and probably his other friends are convinced that Job is just mentally too far gone in his own sin to realize what he has done. I will admit, at least this is a bit of a different tactic from Eliphaz in this discussion, with the whole listing out of like, okay, dude, you must have done something, like, was it maybe this or that or that, or like, can you not see that there must have been something, even if not what I have just listed, something else that would have caused this punishment upon you? The problem is, he is assuming that Job did something when he actually didn't. He trusts his own assumptions more than his supposed friend, Job. So, yeah. And, I mean, okay, God being beyond our understanding has kind of been mentioned before in other chapters. Yeah, sure, there's truth there. But he takes this phrase or this idea now and I guess is assuming that, well, okay, yeah, it's known that God is so great, but that right now seems to be causing you, Job, to think he's so far above us and beyond us that he can't see the details of what's going on down here. Which is not the case. God knows what we're doing. Nor is he actually far from us. But, like, it does, Job has mentioned that it feels as though God has, like, abandoned him or, you know, is far from him. So, like, I'm still not saying Eliphaz is right in any of this. But at least out of the three friends in this argument, Eliphaz seems to be the one who's, like, actually, you know, adding some things to the overall discussion. He's actually responding to things that Job is saying directly, or even implicitly. And even, like, taking different angles on things. Whereas, to an extent, Bildad and especially Zophar, it's been all just like, no, wicked people have bad things happen. And that's pretty much all they've said the entire time. But, yeah, again, this is all kind of with the idea that Eliphaz assumes Job is not thinking clearly and or is not understanding God's judgment clearly. Okay. On to verse 19 after I get a quick sip of water here. Okay. The righteous will be happy to see the wicked destroyed, and the innocent will laugh in contempt. They will say, see how our enemies have been destroyed. The last of them have been consumed in the fire. Submit to God and you will have peace. Then things will go well for you. Listen to his instructions and store them in your heart. If you return to the Almighty, you will be restored, so clean up your life. If you give up your lust for money and throw your precious gold into the river, the Almighty himself will be your treasure. He will be your precious silver. Then you will take delight in the Almighty and look up to God. You will pray to him and he will hear you, and you will fulfill your vows to him. You will succeed in whatever you choose to do, and light will shine on the road ahead of you. If people are in trouble and you say help them, God will save them. Even sinners will be rescued. They will be rescued because your hands are pure. But, like, again, Eliphaz's assumptions lead him to kind of saying the wrong things for the situation, at least. There might be some truth, generally speaking, to what he says, but not necessarily for Job's situation. And really, this stuff about innocent people laughing in contempt, that might be something that we're tempted to do in our human nature. But that's not really what God would have us do. I mean, New Testament concept, but we're commanded as Christians to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. And I think, not laughing in contempt at their demise is kind of, in line with that. In fact, doing the opposite and laughing at their demise is sort of the opposite of what we're commanded to do. Like, that's not showing godly love to your enemies. There may be certain people in this life that I think so many people would be so much better off if these particular individuals were not alive anymore and were not able to influence so much of current culture. But I am called by God to still want the best for those people. And part of my thinking as an extension of that is, like, if they could turn their lives around and, start doing even remotely as much good as the evil that they've done, they could be part of making the world massively better, rather than just fading from existence and probably having things take longer to get better if they ever even do. But tangent done on that point. So now it's been a while since we've gotten much of, this kind of argument from Job's friends. Maybe because Eliphaz is the only one that really brings anything interesting to the conversation. But in his assumption that Job is lost in his sin, he's trying to encourage Job to just do what's right and turn to God, and everything will be fine. As if Job wasn't already trying to do that and trying to live like that before all this bad stuff happened. Like, that must especially sting to Job, or at least hurt, and even maybe make him more frustrated at Eliphaz and his other friends. Sorry, real quick. What's up, cool people? Sam is coming in with the raid. Welcome, raiders. My name's Matt, aka That Random Christian Gamer. As I say, and I have named my channel thus because of this, I'm a random Christian guy, connecting with random people, playing around with games, giving people space to answer their random questions about God, faith, the Bible, and whatever else is on their minds. Welcome, all of you. I mean, you don't have to scatter so quickly. I mean, I understand if you all have stuff you need to do. But, anyway. So, you have joined me in the middle of a very interesting book of the Bible. I am reading through Job currently, which gets pretty deep, very much into nitty-gritty stuff. So, yeah. And especially now that I'm multiple rounds into the discussion that happens within this book, just trying to kind of look at different nuances of conversation it's an interesting thought exercise, let's put it that way. Alright, Samus needs to feed the cat. Yes, do not leave the cat to starve, please. Yeah, and Enitsu, I hope I pronounced that close to decent. Yeah, Job's friends, in a way they do kind of suck. They feel like they're trying to help him. They think he's not thinking clearly, but they just don't understand the situation, and they're like mental and theological framework of life and how God relates to people is leaving them stuck and incapable of sympathizing with Job, really. Or at least incapable of recognizing that he actually hasn't really done anything wrong to deserve all the stuff that's happened to him. Claims that she was starving through my whole stream. I mean, how many other things does a cat do but tell you they're starving and ask for food, but then also turn around and, like, you know, knock your stuff over to try and remind you of their place in the hierarchy, which is above you, of course. I think it's interesting how Job and his friends all were partially right about some things and partially wrong about others, such that they were all wrong instead of one group being right and the other wrong. Yeah, like, they've all kind of been saying things as absolutes, or at least generalizations. But, like, personally, I would give Job a little bit of extra credit compared to his friends, because he's, like, you know, willing to look into the exceptions to the generalizations and a little bit of the gray area of things. Whereas his friends all seem to be rather, nope, it's black and white, and there's nothing else. So much so that, like, they assume because, you know, this misfortune has fallen upon Job, that he must have done something wrong. And that's why we've got Eliphaz here basically trying to convince Job to turn back to God, to do the right thing, and everything will be fine. But Job was already living like that as best he could before he had everything taken away and was afflicted with boils, and also even had his children die, and like, all of that just kind of happened because God pointed out how good Job was to this being called Satan. And Satan was like, all right, test him. Make some bad stuff happen, or let some bad stuff happen, and see how he feels about you. And that just sparked this whole big, long discussion between Job and his friends that we're now, like, 18 chapters deep into? And I'm not sure we're even close to the end of it. But, yeah, Eliphaz is so convinced that, things will go well if Job turns his life around. I'm going to air quote turns his life around, because Job doesn't really need to do that, but Eliphaz thinks he does. And he thinks that things will be so good for Job afterwards that even people who are sinners, who maybe even people who are actively, in the midst of doing wrong, would be rescued by God purely because, Job, being a righteous person, then would say, oh, help this person. And God's like, oh, okay, you got it, because you're a good dude. Which, in a way, sort of ironically again, he said something else that was ironic before, but now even this is a little bit ironically disproving his own framework. Because if a righteous person asking God to rescue a sinner could bring fortune for a sinner, then doesn't that destroy his whole framework of good things only happen to good people and bad things only happen to bad people? Like, Eliphaz, you're defeating your own argument here. All in an effort to try and encourage Job to change his ways that you think he does, but he doesn't really actually need to. But you don't know that, Eliphaz. For anyone who missed it, the previous thing he said that I found a little bit ironic was here in verse 4, he asked, is it because you're so pious that he, God, accuses you and brings judgment against you? I mean, it might not be God's judgment per se, but really it was Job's piety, his righteousness, that God pointed out and was the catalyst for Satan saying, all right, test him. So, in a way, it was because of that all this stuff has happened. Again, irony. Anyway, so, yeah, Job 22, Eliphaz says ironic things. There you go. Anyway, and yeah, I read the whole chapter, and I think I've said all my thoughts on the chapter, so we'll leave it at that. And that was the second chapter of the two that I had planned for tonight. I've actually just kind of been going through the entire Bible, Genesis to Revelation, in all of these Bible studies that I've done. And that's just kind of where I'm at the moment. But yeah, while I could just sort of gloss over all this stuff and be like, yeah, a lot of this has been said before, I feel like that's not really helpful. So I want to try and dig into some details of things. And wouldn't you know it, you get a lot more out of it when you try and dig in. And I'm not even approaching that from a all right, I'm going to try and find the best answers possible here. It's just okay, let's think about this a bit. Okay. Twitch tells me there's an ad break in progress. people who just came in, I don't know for sure how, because I think like if you've only been in for a little bit, sometimes it doesn't show the ads, or maybe it'll show different kind of ads. Anyway, I don't know. I don't really look into that kind of stuff too much. All right. Appreciate the lurk there, Jay. I'm just gonna call you Jay for short. I hope that's all right. And yeah, I mean, you say they were 2 good chapters. I would like to think there can be good conversation around just about any chapter from the Bible. Anyway, okay. The ad break is actually nearly done already. And I am now going to switch things over to something a bit more relaxing. Hopefully we can still keep conversation going, but less planned out discussion. And we can just kind of talk about whatever as I hop into some PowerWash Simulator. Okay. Bringing up the game now. Fading out my background music, because that's not really necessary. Alright. I am in the middle of the final job in the career mode. Well, in the middle of. I guess I'm 20% done with it. I may want to turn the game capture volume down some, because otherwise anything I say is just going to get absolutely overwhelmed by a whole bunch of just whoosh from the game and, you know, power washing things. Okay. So, how are we all doing today? So I personally, like, on the whole, I guess I'm doing alright. Work this week was a bit abbreviated because of Memorial Day, obviously, but, yeah. There's some stuff going on at work that, like, people are trying to figure things out, but the problem is the people who are trying to and or need to, but maybe aren't trying so hard to figure things out, they're having discussions and, like, not necessarily all trying super hard to, like, help each other out and understand each other's situations. And so, without getting into details, there's certain stuff that, you know, we do to track inventory, or at least try to stay up to date on it. And right now, a lot of that effort involves me. Specifically, going around and, like, counting particular parts each week. We do this kind of thing so we don't have to, like, shut the whole place down for, like, a week or so out of the year. but my personal difficulty with all of it is just how much of it is falling on me and how much that is taken away from my other normal responsibilities. And as a result of that, how much a particular part of our production could in the near future significantly slow down. But yeah, really, there's a lot of it that's in a way out of my control how it's handled. I'm trying to do my best to get all the stuff done, but also, like, you know, the fact that we stopped doing this inventory counting for a little while and are now bringing it back and trying to, you know, hammer things out with that. I feel like it is necessary, or at least significantly beneficial, for me to start saying some things about how it's affecting my job and how also just in general I think maybe it could be handled better. I will not claim I'm always saying it with the best words. I'm not saying it angrily at anybody at any given point, but, you know, I just also don't claim to be a wordsmith or anything like that. But, yeah. Long story short, all this counting stuff is a bit frustrating for me. There's also frustration amongst people higher up than me who are then making decisions about this stuff that affect me. Meanwhile, I'm not part of the conversations where things are being decided about this. So that adds a little extra frustration for me because I've got one, maybe two people in those discussions that generally involve at least 5 people that are even hearing anything that I have to say about it. But, I mean, fortunately enough, when, you know, when this particular process was put on pause for a while, I was getting far enough ahead that, at least as of yet, nothing has really come to a grinding halt, or even really significantly slowed down yet, because of all the time and effort I've had to put into this. But if it keeps going at this rate, that will happen quite quickly. So, hopefully it doesn't take too long for, you know, details to get settled with this counting process, and we figure out a strategy that works well for everyone. But, yeah. I have realized also a lot of things that I talk about with people outside of work, I end up saying things related to my work, because, I mean, overall, I live a pretty simple life. I'm not doing a whole bunch of, like, super unusual or exciting or even, like, especially bad things otherwise. Like, I mean, yeah, sure, there's also just general current events and stuff that I could talk about otherwise, I guess. But that also would probably just lead to, you know, more, especially if I talk to current events and such. A lot of those would just lead to more headaches, because, you know, anything political, there's bound to be arguments, and even some things that aren't directly political, people have varying opinions about. And honestly, generally speaking, I have enough frustration at work that I don't really need to be making more frustration for myself by talking about those kinds of things outside of work. Now, I mean, okay, especially at the moment, I don't have a whole lot else going on. I mean, yeah, I've got a couple of church groups that I meet with and volunteer a little bit on the tech team there, but aside from that and this video live streaming stuff that I'm trying to do, can't say there's a whole lot on my schedule. And when I say I lead a pretty simple life, that's essentially what I mean. Like, I don't have 20 things on my calendar each week. I mean, shoot, if you count recurring instances of the same thing, I've got like 3 or 4 things. And that's pretty much it most weeks. I mean, I could maybe break it down into a few more subgroups of that. Anyway. Yeah. So there's some, you know, some of my situation and what I've got going on. Feel free to chime in at any given point with anything that is going on with you or that you just might want to talk about. I'm not opposed to talking, you know, current events or even politics or anything like that. I'm just not necessarily going to start those discussions. Yeah, I am leaving all sorts of just little spots of dirt here and there all over the place. And so it seems like there's a lot of particular sections of this that I'm not necessarily going to get the all clear little ding flash to say it's totally done. Which of course then is going to leave me a whole lot to come back to when I get down to the final percentage points for the job. Alright, I don't necessarily want to leave the air quote-unquote dead for too long, but also I don't want to necessarily talk a ton, just because of some perceived obligation to fill the airspace. So, if I remember right, last time I was playing PowerWash Simulator, I was getting close to the 20% mark right around the end of an hour in the stream, and just kind of went inside here and was like, alright, I'm just gonna wide nozzle a bunch of stuff and pick up those percentage points to get to 20 as quickly as I think I can. I am on pace. Well, that is good, I suppose. At some point, I'm going to have to focus more on A, the middle part of this room, and B, the ceiling. Ceiling could be a bit tricky, especially if I can't just, add some extensions to this to get that stuff. And even if I do add extensions, I'm not as close to the stuff that I'm cleaning then, and that leaves just that much more of a possibility for the tiny bits of dirt to get left behind. No, I'm not planning on going all the way outside yet. Just trying to get to the end of this wall here. Well, I am here, though. I guess I'll go ahead and clean this side of this post, or pillar, as the game wants to call it. Alright. We've got 11 more percent, and it's been 20-ish minutes. Yeah, we're pretty well on pace to match the 20% we got last time. Okay, so, like, just a few seconds ago, I felt a little bit of a sensation on my leg that I was like, okay, did some tiny little bug just bite me or whatever? That's, if there's one thing that I dislike about warmer weather coming around, it's starting to wonder, like, constantly, okay, was that random little thing I felt a bug? And yes, even where I work, despite the fact that it's technically indoors, there's, like, receiving bay doors always open, and, you know, because of that, obviously, very easy for insects to get in. Don't think I've had any issues with any bees at work, really. Mostly just the little kinds of bugs that could bite you but not really sting too bad. But anyway, half the time, the things that I feel and wonder, like, wait, did I just get bit by a bug? It turns out, no, not really. Or at least probably not, because I don't end up having any, like, continued itching or swelling of the area in question. Okay, just real quick. Volcano erupting. And I guess that's supposed to be, you know, the kind of ashes and stuff that it's spewing out. Kind of the cloudy stuff around it. I thought the theory was that that's a lot of the quote-unquote dirt that appears in this game is actually volcanic ash, which would make some sense, but also, like, if that's actively erupting and spreading to where we are, then Shouldn't we see stuff getting dirty again, like, while I'm cleaning it? I don't know. These are the kinds of thoughts that pop into my mind sometimes, especially when I'm not, like, actively focused. Well, I wonder what all the developers of this game kind of, like, based the idea of this structure off of. Like, was there a particular ancient civilization that they were trying to sort of imitate with this? I mean, I guess in a way I could see it being kind of one of the, like, I'll say Central American, or maybe even Southern, anyway. Like, I could see this being an attempt to sort of imitate, you know, Aztec or Inca or one of those kinds of people's things. Although, I think this kind of color scheme might be a little bit more stereotype than it was actual, you know, actually used. Because there's a number of the structures that they built that, you know, out of what we still see today that they built, that it's just, yeah, well, of course the age could have something to do with it, but there's a good deal of it that just looks kind of like, yep, okay, that's made of stone. And it's just stone colored, not white, not, you know, kind of turquoise or whatever you want to call this color up here. Might have some, you know, gold utilized throughout in a number of cases, but as far as the main architecture especially, there's a lot that's just kind of like, yep, it's made of stone. It's a brown, stony color. Let's see here, I'm at 37% now. Still got like better part of 30 minutes until the next ad break on Twitch. Might actually get a little bit more than 20% done today. Hey, I got a ding. Okay, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, and if anyone is so inclined, but I think there's a VR version of PowerWash Simulator. And if so, I can't help but wonder, like, how different that feels. And especially just the looking around aspect of it. I gotta imagine with, you know, the way this currently is, screen shaking back and forth a lot, that might not be the easiest on some people's eyes, or perhaps even could trigger a little bit of motion sickness type stuff. I do wonder a little bit if that would be better in VR, because you'd probably actually be looking around instead of just, you know, moving a thumbstick and, you know, having the screen you're looking at respond. Alright, you see, this is one of those times I'm trying to, for the most part, keep the movement a bit smoother. But also don't want to take a ridiculous number of passes through this. While also not necessarily wanting to leave little bits of dirt behind after I make a sweep through. Oh, hello. 40%. Okay. Actually, that's statues of you, right? Coming from Harper Shaw, new number. How does it feel to be worshipped as a god by an ancient underwater civilization destroyed thousands of years before your birth? Not entirely sure who or what this wishy is that was mentioned there. If that was explained at some point, I apologize. But, I mean, come on. I gotta imagine a lot of people don't pay loads of attention to the text conversations in the game. Because, like, you're too busy cleaning stuff. But also on top of that, in my case, it's been a while since I've seen or read most of the conversations like that give actual, like, knowledge on the characters and stuff that's going on, and really any of the lore. Alright, well, I've officially surpassed 20% for this stream, which is a good thing. Maybe little bits of extra percentages here and there will make up for the likely eventuality that the last few percentage points will take a bunch of extra time. And then this thing can still be done within, 5 hours of effort, roughly. Pardon the yawning. A little bit tired. Hey, I got another ding. It seems to be the trim, pretty much. That seems to be the main part that I'm getting the, 100% completion dings on. Okay. Guess it's time to focus on the middle of this room here. Samus. It's like an alien ship. Well, as a point of reference, there's the outside. I mean, granted, alien ship could still be any number of shapes. Really, I mean, it's only limited by your imagination, essentially. But, also would not be surprised if that ends up being the big reveal that, hey, this thing that's, ancient to us, turns out it was actually aliens. It's a bit of a cliche kind of thing, but that doesn't mean that people don't still try and make stories involving that kind of plot point sometimes. So, anyway, Samus or whoever else, if you don't mind sharing, how have things been? I forget who all out of people potentially viewing, other than Seth would know, but I'm not sure how many of you are aware that, I'm now in Pennsylvania as of a bit over a year ago, and, gotta... Well, actually, there's definitely some similarities to my living situation that I had in Texas, but also there's a lot that's quite different, especially compared to when I wasn't, actively employed full-time. Things have been good. Didn't know where I was before. Yeah, so, up until about a year and a quarter ago, I guess, I had been in Texas for 10 years. Just career/job search stuff moved me down there back in 2015, I guess it was. And then lack of job in that area and being pointed to an opportunity up around here moved me back to this area. Now, I do wonder a little bit, if I had continued to try and do the DoorDash stuff, if I could have made that work out. But the one kind of gig that I had that was, quote-unquote AI training stuff, yeah, that fell just completely out from under me after a few months of doing it. Yes, Seth, I did indeed make it past 20% for this one. Yeah, I can't help but wonder if the company/site that I was doing that AI training stuff through just kind of eventually decided, all right, we've had enough human input. Now we're just gonna kind of let the model take over and scrape data from the internet for whatever we're trying to do. Okay, I am definitely gonna need a ladder or something like that. Well, maybe not. I will need to be at a higher elevation to fully clean this statue. However, there does seem to be an upper floor, in a way. How I get to that upper floor, I'm not 100% certain. You know what? Let me do the second extension here. Yeah, that seems to at least get a powerful enough spray that it cleans stuff on the ceiling fairly well. Although that might just be that part of the ceiling. I think if I go out closer to the middle, that might not work quite as well. Even just like this bit of ceiling here is noticeably higher than this bit that I'm focused on cleaning right now. Yes, a lot of dirt indeed, and really you could say that about practically every job in this game. But maybe I will need a ladder in here anyway, because there's a whole bunch of just little... There's like a little lip going all around that would be tough to get otherwise. Alright, so I'm a little curious. Well, Samus, if you're still there in particular, I'm curious what your thoughts might be. So I know there's been once or twice we've discussed Kingdom Hearts games, and in particular that you're not the biggest fan of Donald's voice. Now, how would you feel about a rhythm game that just happens to be within the Kingdom Hearts universe? There's like... I think literally the only character who actually speaks in the entire game is the female lead, I guess you'd call her, Kairi. And she actually kind of... So it's like a rhythm game, you know... It utilizes music throughout the series, and meanwhile you get occasional, like, kind of bits of story recap from Kairi saying, like, hey, here's what happened, and then, you know, Sora and friends did this, or this group of characters did that stuff, and, like, yeah, story recap. I don't know, I'm actually, personally, playing Melody of Memory lately, which is the name of that rhythm game in question, I'm actually starting to think, in my opinion, that it's actually kind of a decent way to get a general overview of the series. And especially for anyone who might not like a certain character's voice. It's, well, you wouldn't have to deal with listening to that character. Unless the character whose voice you don't like is Kairi, but... Still, I mean, Kairi's voice is pretty normal. I'm not sure how many people would really have, you know, how many people would dislike listening to her. Meanwhile, I'm at 46% now and still got just shy of 9 minutes till the next ad break. I guess maybe last time the constant need to, like, go back up and down on the outside of the structure was... maybe that was slowing me down some. Alright, do I want to just keep doing the whole wash stuff with an extension, or... maybe I want to try and find a ladder now. Obviously, the big old scaffolding like this won't fit inside, but if there is just a ladder, that might be doable. Where would a ladder be? Also, apparently we had to get flown out here. It is just kind of an island, so... sure. Where might I find a ladder? And while I figure out the whole ladder situation, maybe just do a quick run along the kind of trim on the edge here. Of course, if I'm looking at the building, I'm not really looking for a ladder, am I? Well, whatever. I take a pass along the side of the building, and then after I've walked along that side, just kind of turn around a little bit and see, is there a ladder nearby? So far, that answer has been no. Of course, now I'm back to the first side of the structure, so... yeah. Really not sure, then, if there's a ladder. Well... could also just engage in some major acrobatics. Kind of would like to get this statue cleaned, although I will say the lack of a ladder is... well, there's a strong possibility that that would be a nuisance when dealing with, you know, the ceiling of this center room here. Yeah, the way things are shaping up, I'm not quite sure. Well, also because I'm focused on the little bits of this statue now. Not quite sure that I'm going to get to 50% here, but already pretty close. Yeah, come on now. Yep. Yeah. And there's a whole second floor here. Yeah, not gonna do that right now. Anyway, okay. You know what? I'll just go back to doing this for the remainder of the time, I think. Walk up so we can see how big it is. How big what is? The statue? I guess I already did that, if that's what you were asking about. Or are you talking about, like, the building as a whole? Oh, yeah, and I still have this side for the exterior. Actually, I have 3 of the 4 sides of the exterior still to do. Come on. Let me up. Yeah. I'm all the way at the top now. I don't know what exactly you were wanting me to... to climb my way up, but there you go. Anyway, I was doing stuff inside. Now how do I get back in at like a halfway point? There we go. I also just realized I have not used the dirt button. Well, that was the first time I used the dirt button in this whole stream. Or dirt finder button, I guess would be a better way to describe it. Seriously though, a ladder would have been great. Well, it's 49%, and the ads are about to start. I mean, I guess I could keep going long enough to get it up to 50. I'm not on that strict of a, schedule for the evening. Yeah, I think the second floor would actually be a little bit easier to clean than the first. But with how much progress I already made on the first floor, I'd rather try and maybe not wrap that up 100%, but like get it looking mostly done. Nope. Okay. Oh, hey, there's 50%. And of course, I hit 50, like, right at the end of the ad break. Okay. I still find it weird that I can't find a ladder or anything like that. Like, practically every job in this game has a ladder. Or at least a stool. Yes, I know there's that. That helps with the outside, not really so much the inside. But I see nothing that would help me gain elevation, except the scaffolding. Nothing that would help me gain elevation inside. Which, I mean, I guess kinda, sorta, with like how easy it is to just scale the outside of the building and get to the upper floor like that. Maybe that's why. I don't know. I just think some of this stuff around the edges of the room is going to be really annoying without any kind of a ladder. But oh well. I suppose that will do it for now. Okay. Yeah, I think that's enough for me tonight, at least. Oh yeah, I never even mentioned. I woke up today and like my right shoulder was feeling a little sore with certain movements. Like, I don't know. Must be, or I'm hoping it was one of those just slept on it a little weird kind of things and it'll go away before too long. Anyway, alrighty. Time to give you the upcoming schedule while I figure out a raid target. So, tomorrow we will be continuing Kingdom Hearts Melody of Memory. I think I mistakenly said last week, maybe even the week before. Well, no, I guess it was just last week. That I would be doing birth by sleep related stuff. No, I did most of that. I mean, technically the first place I'll go to is from like Fragmentary Passage, which also has the birth by sleep like phrase in part of its title. But really the bulk of it, I think, is going to be focused on stuff from Dream Drop Distance. So anyway, that's going to be tomorrow's stream. That stuff from Melody of Memory. Week from today will be Job chapters 23 and 24. And it'll be a Gems of War week. There is definitely less doubt in my mind that there will be a new Mythic troop that week. And then a week from tomorrow, it'll be Borderlands 4. the last, like, side mission focused stream / recording session thing. Okay. And I have... sorry. I have scanned through the raid options. Yep. There you have it. There's the upcoming schedule. Maybe more side questing on Thursdays for Borderlands 4 coming. Possibly, yeah. I mean, I would definitely be open to that after completing, like, the main story of it. You can always do it during it. I mean, yeah, when I'm playing a story-focused game, like, I don't necessarily want to be super over-leveled. I don't mind it terribly, but I don't necessarily, like, I'm not aiming to be, you know, just able to breeze through everything. We went back and did it for the Kingdom Hearts. I mean, a lot of the side questing we did for those games was still after I completed the main story. Anyway. Yeah, I think Borderlands 4 does tend to kind of, like, level scale the enemies a bit. But, like, I'm never really sure to what extent. And, like, I guess also part of it was not wanting to constantly have to be like, hey, while I was not recording, here's what happened. Anyway, for memories, we could go back and do the stars too. Yeah, there's a chance I might actually have to go back and redo some stuff to unlock, or yeah, to access some of the stuff that was revealed last time. But we could maybe talk a little bit more about that tomorrow or at some other later time. All right. It's not quite related necessarily, but PowerWash Simulator has me thinking water, and I have found a channel I follow playing Subnautica, so maybe that's where we'll raid. Yeah. I don't really have too much else to say, so if we're all... Slay the Spires up there in the on-deck. Yeah. We do still have that run to work on. Okay, well, I think I'm about to initiate a raid. Hope that run goes a long time with the Endless. Yeah. I mean, there's the possibility, but remember, you were trying to make it difficult enough that it wouldn't last more than an hour. Anywho. 2.5 runs like that in particular would be quite the feat, I think. All right, anyway. I'm initiating the raid. That's going to do it for me. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another stream. Feel free to check out edited stuff on YouTube in between streams. There's your last little peek at the schedule there. What Seth just posted. But yeah, whatever ends up happening. Till the next time I see y'all. Stay cool, everybody.